Welcome to News Nation Now. I'm Jisoo Gi. Hope you're having a great start to your Monday, the beginning of your week. If you can believe it, this is the last week in February, and it also means it's the last week that we are celebrating officially, federally, Black History Month. Joining us right now is Deborah Douglas. She's an author, she's a professor at DePaul University, and she's just written a book, just been released, U.S. Civil Rights Trail, A Traveler's Guide to the People, Places, and Events that Made the Movement. So Deborah is joining us now. Hi, Deborah. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Fantastic. Thanks so much for being with us. So this book was just released last month, right?
Yes,
Perfect timing, I think. Did you plan this out this way?
yes, I did.
I think you're a pretty organized person, I'd have to say. So let's talk a little bit. Where was your inspiration?
Well, timing was the inspiration. In 2018, 12 Southern travel offices banded together and designated an official civil rights trail in the South. So that gave me the opportunity to actually be the first person to curate this journey of the official civil rights trail. It actually starts as far east as Wilmington, Delaware, and goes as far west as Kansas. But I focused on 13 cities and states that really capture the narrative arc of the mid century civil rights movement.
Was it difficult for you to narrow it down to 13 cities?
Of course it was. And I'm sure that some cities and some states feel some kind of way about being left off, but I hope that I can add them to subsequent editions. However, there are just some cities that are just so central to the civil rights movement that, you know, it's easy to include them in the narrative. For example, Little Rock, which is where the Little Rock integration crisis happened. And or Farmville, Virginia, which was one of the cases in Brown v. Board, or Atlanta, because of all things Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., or the Atlanta student movement, for example. Of course, Memphis, where Dr. King was assassinated and where the 68 sanitation worker strike occurred, or Nashville, which was one of the sites of the one of the student movements that had a great impact because Nashville was the first city in the South that began to desegregate public accommodations thanks to the movement activity there.
So, Deborah, I mean, on a basic level, this is a book that is essentially a travel guide. There's places where you can go and visit, places where you can shop, places where you can eat, but
Absolutely.
it's a lot more than that, too.
It is. So I started out with this idea that it would be a travel book. I would tell you about all the museums you needed to go to or places where history occurred, like in the Mississippi Delta and, places associated with the murder of Emmett Till. I always plan to include restaurants and places to shop. And so, but it turned into so much more. It turned into a bona fide history book and civics primer because in learning about the movement and how the people activists strategize, you actually learn how democracy works. And it turned into a history book because I had to contextualize for every city the very specific issues that were going on in that place at that time to make people risk everything to stand up for their rights. So I have exhaustive timelines for every city, so you know specifically what's going on. And but I curate an entire experience. So you're engaging with the history, but you're engaging with the cities that you're going to. And in my book, I prioritize sending readers to Black-owned businesses. So unless otherwise specified, you may assume that you're interfacing with Black-owned businesses. I mentioned like the Busy Bee Cafe, where Dr. King and other movement leaders ate in Atlanta, or Lasses Inn, where Daisy Bates, who took charge of the 9 students who were involved in the Little Rock integration crisis. Well, movement leaders ate at Lasses Inn in Little Rock. They're known for their buffalo ribs, which I had. Is buffalo fish cut into like ribs. It's so delicious. And then I send you to like Black-owned businesses, to buy things like if you want to buy jewelry or the kind of trinkets that you buy, on a trip. I send people there, and then I offer nightlife options. This is like a well-rounded, a trip, a well-rounded journey and itinerary. And I break it up in a way that, I'll tell you how to engage with a particular city, or if you want to connect, 1 or 2 cities in a trip. And it's perfect for weekends. It's perfect for, vacations. I try to think of everything.
I think you really did. You know, you mentioned that you were always kind of interfacing with Black-owned businesses. I think that's something that's come to the forefront, especially with sort of the racial justice movement that was sparked last year in 2020. Um, that was intentional on your part. You wanted to make sure that there was a lasting impact, not only for the reader, but the people that you visited and interacted with.
Well, yeah, once you read about this history and you think, about the through line to the issues that we are dealing with now, I felt like I wanted people to leave communities better off than when they left it. And I think the best way to invest in this story and invest in African American people is to invest in their institutions. And the easiest way to do that is to turn your dollar over in the Black community. Also, to me, it's a part of ethical travel.
Can you talk a little bit more about what it means to be ethical when you're traveling?
Well, it's funny because I was in the Delta at a museum called Ethic. It's one of the museums dedicated to the story of Emmett Till. It's in Glendora, Mississippi. It's a Black town that has a Black neighbor. And a congressional aide for Benny Thompson came into the museum one day, and she wanted to know why I was there. She pulled the owner of the museum, who happens to be the mayor of Glendora, Mayor Thomas, pulled him to the side, and she was looking at me like in an accusatory way, like, what is she doing here? What does she want? And so, I've been practicing journalism for a long time, so I'm used to, all kinds of people. So I stepped to her, and I said, do you have an issue with my presence here? Can I, tell you about what I'm doing? And I told her what I was doing. She's like, well, are you just going to take our story and just leave and never come back? And so that allowed me to engage her in a conversation about how I don't want to be an extractive storyteller, that I want to, plant a seed in this community, send people to this community, to invest in this community, to enjoy and learn and respect what this community is all about. And she ended up, calming down, and she said she was going to go get something to eat. And I said, well, I'm hungry. Can I go too? So I actually had her take me to one of the restaurants on my list that's featured in the book, and we're still friends today.
Well, I love how you just light up when you're talking about that interaction. Can you narrow it down to one favorite place or location or visit or person that you met along this journey as you wrote this book?
Well, I met Sybil Jordan Hampton, who was part of the second group of students who integrated Little Rock Central High School. In 1958, they shut down schools altogether. They shut down high schools in Little Rock altogether because they didn't want to integrate. And in 1959, they opened the school back up, and Sybil was part of the group of students who integrated Little Rock Central High School the second time. And I met her when I was down there. I was introduced to her by a friend, and she ended up showing me around and just narrating the story of Little Rock for me. And she's just a wonderful person. She's like an auntie to me now, or like a dear friend. So I made those kind of contacts. That congressional aide that I told you about, I literally talked to her 2 weeks ago. We talk quite frequently, so I made a lot of friends along the way.
How long did it take you to write this book?
Less than a year. I know
Wow,
that sounds kind of crazy,
that's
but
so
I started.
impressive.
You all, I've always operated under deadline pressures, and so I just took it seriously. I started traveling the summer of 2019, and I wrote chapters along the way. And then, of course, I had chapter revisions, but I traveled and wrote in addition to my other jobs. So, teaching and doing other kinds of journalistic writing. But really, it was just a discipline. It was a discipline of just sitting down, getting it done, casting a wide net, and just never giving up on the interviews with people I really wanted to include in my book, like Diane Nash, or making inroads to Elizabeth Eckford, who was the young woman in the iconic photos of the Little Rock integration crisis.
We're speaking with award-winning journalist and professor. She's a very busy lady, Deborah Douglas. She's written a book just released last month, U.S. Civil Rights Trail, A Traveler's Guide to the People, Places, and Events that Made the Movement. And Deborah, let's talk a little bit more about your book, because I want people to be sure to put this on their list. Where can people get the book, by the way?
Everywhere. So, of course, you can order it from Amazon. They'll have it to you in one day. but I also have a shop on bookshop.org. It supports independent booksellers. So if the ethics of buying books is important to you, Bookshop is the way to go. Barnes and Noble. And I just did an online search and I saw it at Target and Walmart. Go figure.
Congratulations. So it's perfect timing, Black History Month. On top of that, we're in a pandemic right now. People are really going to be traveling, continuing to travel, doing road trips, traveling in RVs with their families. This would be a great book to pick up and then plan that next family trip, because you can go as deep as you want to go, right? You can get really
Absolutely.
into the history, or you can just sort of be there and enjoy the landmarks and the food and the shopping and the fun.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how you've broken it up. There's actually maps in there. There's full colored photos of delicious food.
Yes. So, well, every chapter has a playlist. It has music that speaks to the events of that particular city or state.
Hmm.
And so, for example, I mentioned the Ballad of Medgar Evers in the Jackson chapter by Phil Ox. I mentioned the Carlton Reese Choir, which was the choir of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights, which was founded by the Reverend Fred Lee Shuttlesworth. Um, they found it because the state of Alabama outlawed the NAACP in Alabama, so they started their own movement. So I have or music, playlist set up for that, and I also curated it on Spotify. So if you go to Spotify and go to U.S. Civil Rights Trail, then you can listen to the music, as you go about your day to day life. And like I said, I have shopping opportunities. I send people to cultural institutions, like, all of the relevant museums along the trail, or to physical spaces like in Ruleville, Mississippi, there's a park dedicated to Fannie Lou Hamer. You can go interface and commune with that. There are nightlife options to go party. That was hard to it was hard to figure out what to put in, because when I was looking around Selma, I'm like, where do they party in Selma? It turns out they go to the Elks Lodge in Selma. It was so funny.
We should mention too, I was talking about a road trip, but this is a book that's just great for the history buff, somebody that wants to learn and educate themselves about Black history and the civil rights movement. So this isn't something that you actually have to go and get on the road. You can fully enjoy it by just reading it from your couch, right?
Absolutely, you can. Like I said, it turned into a history book, which was daunting for me because, historians, that's a very special skill. So I took it very seriously. Also, I talk about modern day movements. I include timelines. So to help people understand where we were, what we accomplished during the movement during that time, and then how that connects to movements that came after that, all the way until 2020 with the Black Lives Matter protests, the largest social justice protest in the history of the country, according to the New York Times. So I also give resources. So if you want to learn more about the themes associated with the movement or with Black Lives Matter, which I feel is like just, part two of that and more expansive, I give books to read, movies to watch. It really is a one-stop source for everything you want to know about how we live today.
Wanted to mention, you said it took you about a year to work on this book from research to finishing it. When did you finish up the actual writing? You mentioned the 2020 riots, the especially all of the marches for racial justice. When did you finish wrapping up all of your research and work on the book?
I think I probably turned it over in May, and then I did some follow-ups. There's an audiobook version of this, so I had to go to the studio and record the preface. Bree Newsome is featured in my book. I interviewed her, but she also wrote my foreword, and so Bree's voice is heard on the audiobook version. So there are things like that involved.
Well, I was asking because how fascinating all the pivoting and adjusting that you had to do, because you're writing about the civil rights movement, and then of course then it's happening right there once again in 2020, and then you're also having to adjust for the pandemic as well.
It really didn't faze me because I feel like past is prologue, to quote Shakespeare. And I was ready for this. I think 2020 may have surprised a lot of people, but it did not surprise me.
Hmm. And what's the takeaway that you hope that someone picking up the book will glean from reading your, you worked so hard on this project?
Right. So I really want people to talk to each other, talk to your family members. especially talk to your older family members and talk about their role and their beliefs in the movement. I tell people very frankly, you might find out that your family didn't even believe in civil rights, And so I think that it's an invitation to understand where you stand on today's issues, which have a direct connection to the civil rights movement. Some of this stuff is still in play. Like the Selma to Montgomery March applied the pressure to get the Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed. But Shelby v. Holder gutted some of the critical protections of that law. And so now that we have a new regime, we have an opportunity to strengthen the Voting Rights Act again, to fight against voter suppression, the voter suppression that we've all just witnessed. And we probably have an opportunity to have it cover all 50 states as opposed to a few states mostly centered in the South. There's just so much we can do. The Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act, it passed both houses of Congress last year. It was introduced by Congressman Bobby Rush. And in the reconciliation phase, it couldn't get past Kentucky Senator Rand Paul because he wanted changes. I talked to the congressman's office, and I was told that the congressman agreed to a lot of the changes that Rand Paul wanted, but he didn't want to change the name of the act. He did not want to erase Emmett Till's name. And that's the one thing that Rand Paul wanted to be changed. He wanted to take his name off the act. So it did not pass. So now we have an opportunity to reintroduce that act because it's still not a federal crime to lynch someone in the United States.
Thank you so much for being with us, Professor Douglas. Incredible book. It's called U.S. Civil Rights Trail, A Traveler's Guide to the People, Places, and Events That Made the Movement. I think the book is very reflective of you because it's an incredibly approachable book. I think it's a book that doesn't matter who you're going to gift it to, they're going to find a level of enjoyment in it.
Thank you.
And remind us where we can get the book again.
Amazon, Bookshop, Barnes & Noble, online at Target and Walmart.
And what are you working on next?
Oh, I just had a cover story come out at Chicago Magazine. It was the new power list. And because I wrote it, it has an equity focus.
Wonderful. And right now you're teaching at DePaul University, right?
DePaul with a W. It's in central Indiana, outside of Indianapolis. I'm the Eugene S. Pulliam Distinguished Visiting Professor of Journalism.
Well, you've been our distinguished guest, so thank you so much for being with us and sharing your hard work and telling us about your incredible book.
I appreciate this.
Thank you so much. That was Professor Deborah Douglas. She's also an award-winning journalist as well. I'm going to give you the name of the book one more time. It's U.S. Civil Rights Trail, A Traveler's Guide to the People, Places, and Events That Made the Movement. Something to look forward to, especially if you're planning a road trip to some of the southern states. It covers over 14 southern states. If you want to rent that RV maybe and go out with your entire family. It's not only a history lesson, but it's also food for the soul. And she does mention a lot of great places that you can actually get delicious food. So thanks so much for watching. I'm G. You're watching News Nation Now. Stay with us throughout the day for